Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Glad to know you guys are awake this afternoon. Again, welcome to DEI Will Endure, but corporate advocates will need to reframe their approach. I want to introduce each of our panelists from left to right.
Hey, I'm Jill Ramshaw. I'm the Vice President of Human Resources for Marathon Oil. Not from here originally, so don't have a bit of an accent. I'm from Scotland.
Wow, speaking of diversity, my name is Lucho Vizcardo. I work for Nabors industry. I've been attending these one-day meetings for at least about a couple of years. Happy to be here and share my thoughts.
Hi everyone, I'm Elise Smith. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Praxis Labs. We're an immersive learning and development company focused on inclusive leadership. Love being in conversations around DE&I and how we can collectively come together to move the work forward. So encourage connection, LinkedIn, all of the above. This is how we make a real impact and advance the work together.
Hi everyone, I'm Madhuri Kumar. I am VP and Global Head of Talent for a company called ChampionX. I don't know how many of you have heard of ChampionX in the room? Good, happy to see that. We're a young company, 3 years old. So I have the privilege of doing a bunch of things in my role, leading a team that's designing solutions for the full employee life cycle, right from recruiting up to retirement. And in my role, I get to be the facilitator of our D&I Council, which is headed by our CEO. So it's a great privilege to do that work. I'm happy to be here. This is my first From Day One conference, and I'm having tons of fun so far.
Hi, my name is Mindy Fitzgerald, and I'm the head of diversity and our global director of culture and engagement. And I work for a company called Air Products. Air Products is an industrial gas company where we encourage and invite people to reimagine what's possible in the energy transition. And we have 23,000 employees who are committed to generating a cleaner future.
Give everyone a round of applause. So we can go ahead and just dive in. So today we're mostly talking about where DEI is going, but before we look forward, I want to look back on the last few years of activism, and I'd love to hear from each of you about how DEI, has worked in terms of addressing injustice and creating opportunities.
So I can start. I think from a corporate environment standpoint, I think it's rejuvenated and given momentum to have some of the more really difficult and challenging conversations that companies need to have. And I also think it's helped equip HR and also D&I professionals because there has been so much focus and there's been so many avenues for people to go and share ideas and learn, and so many conferences like we have today. So I think the last 3 years has just kind of raised the capability around the conversation. And Marathon also, we've been around for a very long time as a company. So we've had various iterations of DE&I initiatives. But I think in the last 3 years, what's been really nice and pleasant for us has been that it's kind of encouraged our employees to be bold, and we've increased our employee resource groups, and they're very much supported by leadership, but they're really organic and really driven from our employees. And I think that's also allowed us to have some of the harder conversations because these employee resource groups allow kind of small group conversations to really get under the surface and really kind of think through some of the more things that people are not always comfortable talking about. And I think even during COVID, when we were all virtual, they created an avenue for connection and engagement. And everyone is included as part of these ERGs. So I think it's allowed this kind of shared connection around culture, community engagements, and then also career development. So for me, it's been very valuable in terms of engaging our workforce.
So in our case, it has been an interesting, I call it a journey. As she was saying, we all started kind of during COVID or things that we were learning how to act and how to, deal with, traditionally most of the jobs were at the office. You cannot handle certain things within the office, etc. And now that you have more like a hybrid, or we were forced to work from home, and whatever any of you might be on this journey, it was really interesting. I can say, and I still call it a journey, where at the beginning we were all learning the terms and what do you mean with this, and we were learning on how to be more DEI. As we go through, we kind of become more robust. You talk about ERG, that's a kind of more mature, the employee resources group. Now, after 3 years, we do have several ERG groups. We're heading there. Now, about a year or so, we have all this initiative. I've heard your job is global. We started at US, maybe Houston, since Houston is our headquarters. And then we try to mirror all of these initiatives and make it global. And that's where we are. We're all learning. We're all together on this journey. And I believe we're heading into the right direction.
Yeah, I echo a lot of what I heard both Jill and Lucho say. I think I have the privilege of getting to work with clients across industry, from Google and Amazon, Target, BCG, really some of the largest enterprises. And I think coming out of the 2020 murder of George Floyd, what we saw was not just from those clients, but the whole kind of environment and awareness and awakening for folks who weren't aware or really paying attention to some of the inequities we were seeing. And that activism, what it caused was corporations to respond. They had to first say, oh my goodness, where are we? What are we doing? So they understood the data that was in front of them of their own workforce. And I think that was a core part of our ability to now, as we think about moving forward, be able to respond and intervene. So I think in that sense, that activism really has had an incredible impact on building a foundation for organizations who hadn't come as far, but also for those organizations who were really progressive and advanced already to say, okay, let's shore up these gaps. Let's shore up these opportunities. And so I think from that standpoint, it was quite powerful. From when I think about the employee experience, I think it was also really impactful. When we think about Gen Z and millennials, they are choosing to work at places that are aligned to their values. And we know that an overwhelming majority of them want to work at places that prioritize ESG, diversity and the environment. And actually, I think a recent study from Deloitte found that 1/3 of Gen Z and millennials actually chose not to take a job because they didn't feel like they were prioritizing DE&I and the environment in an appropriate way. And so when I think about what that activism spurred for the employee experience, particularly for that next generation of workforce, it showed that organizations care about these topics. They are willing to actually take a stand. They're willing to speak about them, and they're willing to create opportunities for advancement in a more equitable way. And we saw that data. I think in 2021, about like 90% of SP 100, Global 100 companies, the roles that they brought on, people of color. Now, they might have been more entry careers, likely some of this Gen Z millennial folks, but I think what that shows is that we brought a diversity of folks into our workplace. And I think phase 2 of this work, of this activism work that sparked in 2020 and beyond, is really now, how do we make the workplace inclusive? How do we actually make true equitable outcomes for our teams, but also for our clients and our customers?
Well, I'm going to build on 2 points that you said, which reminded me of a moment when I was interviewing with ChampionX, which is exactly a year, February of 2023. And as soon as I told my son, who's now 26, that I'm interviewing with ChampionX, and never heard of the name before. So what does he do? Picks out his phone, Googles ChampionX, looks at the website, doesn't care what industry it is, goes straight to the leadership page. And then, Mom, really? Right? So I said, well, don't they need help? That's why I'm going there.
Are you sure?
So I think, to the point that this is a journey we're all on. Are we where we want to be? No, but that's important work. And the activism of this generation, the new generation entering the workforce, is going to help us really speed this work up because they're not going to accept anything less. So I truly believe that this work is about creating the workplace of the future. I've been in the talent and human capital space for a couple of decades now. And I remember up to 10 years ago, we used to talk about, hey, the future's coming, a lot of change, a lot of disruption, new thinking, we'll need innovation, we'll need open minds. Guess what, we're there now. And I feel personally, in my role, I'm doing my life's best work. I get to facilitate our D&I Council, headed by our CEO, who is one of the most passionate leaders that I've ever come across in my career. He's well respected. You can Google him. He's won awards in the D&I space. He's really after building an organization where everyone can belong. So sure enough, when we were formed at the height of the pandemic, 2020, out of the merger of two spin-offs, one from Ecolab, our chemicals business, and one from Apogee, which is our artificial lift business, two big players coming together with lots of legacy, a lot of rich cultures that are invested in building a people-oriented organization. I see that we've also started shifting our conversation from numbers to the culture piece, right? We recognize truly when we look at our data that while we might be attracting diversity, we're not keeping them as long as we want to. So we have a leaky boat, right? And that leaky boat will only be fixed with the right culture. And so while we have a great culture, it's about continuous improvement of that culture to get to a place where everyone can belong. So that's what we're after. And all of our initiatives are focused on that. I remember the first D&I Council meeting that I facilitated back in July of last year when I assumed my role and got settled in. We were looking at our data and the conversations were messy, they were hard. Those 90 minutes, we were just going down rabbit holes that were not productive. And thereafter, we collectively made a decision. Let's put the numbers on the back burner. Let's not lead with numbers because they're distracting. Because at the end of the day, what we're after is creating the right culture. The numbers will follow. So we believe that if we get inclusion right, diversity will follow.
I think when you think about DEI, and Air Products, we call it DIV, it has been a journey. And I appreciate you calling out the murder of George Floyd because it was a marker, and it's a marker that we all think about and we reflect on. A lot of companies had ERGs and were engaging in conversations, but I believe at that point in time, companies were called to act. They were called to do initiatives. We put in a legal advocacy program, development programs, new ERGs. The question wasn't what's the conversation. The question is, what's your company doing? And as we look to the future, that's what I feel sometimes is being challenged. And I know that's the direction you want it to go, is what's the future look like? Because where we've been, we've had great conversations. Companies have taken some actions. And now those actions and those initiatives are under attack in our society.
So when you all consider the current challenges and backlash against DEI initiatives, are you and your companies likely to take your foot off the gas? Or are you going to play a longer game where steady progress is more of your philosophy? Mindy?
Yeah, we are not taking our foot off the gas. Sometimes we take an thank you. Sometimes that's not popular. Sometimes that's not popular with our employees. Remember that. We have manufacturing all across the world, and that's not always a popular perspective. We're not in this game to make friends, and we're not in this game to be comfortable, okay? We're in this because this is the right thing for our company to do, and it's good business. Diversity, inclusion, and belonging, DEI, however your frame is good business. So we're not taking our foot off the gas. But we need to start thinking differently and reframing for us what that means. What does that mean? What does diversity in 2025, 2027 look like in a company where our employees of underrepresented groups of employees, what is their lived experience? How does that show up? And what are we doing to meet their needs as employees? Because we know employee engagement is definitely moving forward in the future. So I don't know if I answered the question, but we're not taking our foot off the gas. We're reframing and rethinking and trying to keep an employee-centric and employee engagement focused and keep that central to how we move forward.
Jill, I'd also like to hear from you.
Yeah, well, I couldn't echo more the importance of embedding DE&I in culture and engagement. And if you really strip it back to the basics, what are you trying to do? You're trying to make sure that everybody in your company is successful and performing at their highest potential. So, we know there's a business case for DE&I. We know it enhances decision-making, drives innovation, increases profitability, and it's a good thing to make sure that all employee voices are heard and everybody's able to achieve their best and meet their potential. So I think for us, because it's that investment in culture, and it's hard, this is not something that you're able to achieve overnight. It's constantly iterating, it's constantly pivoting. Why would we take our foot off the gas? Why wouldn't we be focusing on culture, engagement, making sure our employees want to work for us and are successful working for us? Because I do agree, if we don't get it right, we're going to lose them. So.
Madhuri, I'd love to hear from you. What adjustments or reframing strategies do you believe would strengthen the business and moral case for continued efforts in DEI?
So I think I'll reemphasize what I said earlier, is the reframing is around the culture. It's less about, the numbers, like I said earlier, if we are getting inclusion right, for us, that means embedding inclusion across the life cycle, which is inclusive hiring, inclusive onboarding, inclusive development, inclusive talent management. That is, everybody has an equitable playing field to grow their careers here. We are a company that believes that that's possible. We are figuring out how to do it. So the reframing is really about looking at our practices and putting that lens to it where the bias exists today and debiasing them. Learning as people leaders how to recognize where the bias is, learning behaviors to interrupt those biases in the moment. A lot of work needs to be done there, right? We are not perfect, we are messy humans trying to do the right thing. So my team is figuring out what that journey looks like. How do we take our people leaders through that journey to build those skill sets? The good thing, we have a lot of good things going for us in our company. For example, the mindset that culture is leader-led, it's leader-driven. There are no 2 points about that in the organization. So there's a lot of expectations of our people leaders. We are worried about how many added, expectations we have of our leaders, how much training we are putting them through. It's exhaustive. So keeping that balance of expectations, building skills, driving the right behaviors is a lot. So we are also very mindful of how we pace ourselves. Our CEO does a good job of reminding us every time in the council, guys, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Let's pace ourselves. It's a journey we're on. We shouldn't be about, hitting these milestones quarter after quarter. Let's make it reasonable and take everybody along with us. So that's how we are reframing it. And to that end, we're also shifting how we measure the metrics that are going to determine if we're doing the right thing, the right impact, measuring it. So for example, just to give you an anecdote here, 3 months ago, we did our employee engagement survey. Scores are amazing. It reflects the culture we have. But as you dig down deeper, you start looking at inclusion. That's where you start to see opportunities. So we're doing that work of digging into the data to see where those pockets of opportunities are. Good news is it's hotspots, it's not universal, so we can then take some action in those hotspots. So I would offer that those are kind of things that we are reframing.
What about you, Elise?
Yeah, Marjorie and I are like on the same page, I think, because I would agree that those are kind of the two reframes I'm seeing with the clients we work with and in the field is the first and foremost from standalone DE&I to embedded.
Yes.
It cannot be its separate division. You can't do a DEI training and then a separate manager training. Being a manager is being a manager who leads with inclusion, who leads with a lens towards equity. And so I think we have moved away from the paradigm of those being two separate things. Actually, the DEI leader, their role is now, it's not about, okay, I'm gonna do a training, I'm gonna do this activity, I'm gonna do this. It's like, okay, I'm gonna partner with talent development. Okay, I'm gonna partner with our vendor or like our vendor group, our vendor team. You know, we're partnering across the business. We're collaborators. The DEI leaders are now the expert in what it means to be equitable and inclusive and coaching and supporting and influencing across the business along with those partners. And then the second piece, I would agree. I think where we started was, all right, let's align our leadership team and make sure the leadership team is really on board with equity and inclusion and diversity. And I think to your point, Jill, we know the business case. Our executive leaders are on board. They understand why we're doing this. It's about our people leaders,
Right.
that middle level of
middle.
management who, to your point,
Yeah.
it is the hardest time to be a manager because all of these things are now being brought to work. Politics, war, like identity and attacks on identity. And so managers have to navigate all of that on top of being a manager and achieving business expectations in a year where the economy is tenuous. And so I think the ask on people managers is high. And it does go back to skill building.
Yes.
And it does go back to what are the foundational skills that embed equity and inclusion into an employee experience. It's about giving feedback across difference, navigating difficult conversations, asking open-ended questions, having care and accountability be at the same time. That's really the skills we help our clients build through at scale through simulations, but I think you can do it in many ways. I think to your point on measurement, again, I'm just following you, Madhuri, because I think at the end of the day, you actually do need to measure if you are making progress so you can better intervene. And so one of our clients is a great place to work. They had incredible engagement scores, but they saw a dip last year in engagement, kind of across the board, but definitely for underrepresented groups. And what we found is that when their managers and their teams worked with us, they actually had a 10% higher engagement score because these foundational skills are so core to people feeling seen, people feeling engaged, and able to bring their best to work. And so for us, it's about how do we move from standalone to embedded? How do we move from just executives to all people managers being able to engage in this type of work and build those skills through practice?
So, Lucho, many companies have shifted their focus toward terms like belonging to ensure that DEI is not threatening to anyone. What have been some effective ways to mitigate those feelings of resentment that some might feel?
Wow, so many questions, and I wanted to compliment some of you guys. But yes, I will say that at least at Nabors, and I feel most of your comments. So where do you want me to? It has been an evolution where, like I said at the beginning, it has been a journey. We all learn. We didn't have all the answers at the beginning. And I believe that the maturity of the company, of the culture, has been up to a place where now we are up to go to the next level, for lack of a better term. Belonging is where you try to integrate all these things that you learn that probably work or didn't work in the past, and you're trying to become better as a company. I believe you mentioned something really good. I don't know if you noticed most of this, we're telling all the experience, etc. Sometimes I believe, and it happened to us, but we learned the wrong way. Have you asked the employees what they want? We try to fix all these things with DEI, the belonging, etc. But we kind of paused a little bit, and that was like the second year where instead of us trying to do our best based on benchmarking and all these things that you heard, and why don't we ask them?
Yeah.
What do they want? What are some of the 2 or 3 things that you want us to accomplish on these DEI initiatives? ERGs, at least in our company, are huge. That's kind of our next level of DEI, where people get together, they talk about it, they find ways of either promoting some area of expertise, or, I don't know. Over here, we talk about generations. Trust me. I mean, it was really interesting how it's as easy as trying to learn what some of the generation, what they like, what they don't like, versus how to get along. You get into leaders and etc. So it's been an interesting journey, and I'm sure it's going to continue. And it's like a continuous improvement. Hopefully, I answer your question.
Mindy?
I think, so we want to create a belonging experience where our employees feel seen.
Yes.
We need to be really careful that if somebody comes up to us and says, you're woke at your company, that we don't all of a sudden pivot and lose diversity in favor of belonging. And that's what I worry about, quite honestly. Well, you're woke over there, so we're not going to worry about diversity. We're going to talk about belonging because that's a kumbaya and harmony, whatever. The reality is diversity is a big D. It needs to be acknowledged as a big D. And we need to equip our people leaders to be inclusive and understand what that means in all elements of underrepresented groups. Belonging is important. Don't hear that it's not. But please be very at least this is something that we talk about. Our company, we work with National Action Council for Minorities in Engineering, and we're on the board there, and we have a lot of colleagues, and we meet together quarterly, and we talk about these issues. How do we keep the edge sharp? How do we not dull it down in our language? Again, I kind of said this earlier, and I'm not trying to be controversial. We're not in this work because it's easy. We're in this work because we believe in it. And so belonging is important. The employee experience is important. We have surveys that we take to find out how that is. We listen, and we create a listening culture so that we can respond to our employees. But let's not underestimate those underrepresented groups' lived experiences in our communities, and sometimes how emphasizing or overemphasizing belonging underemphasizes or undervalues or respects that lived experience. Just something that we've had a lot of conversations about at some of these meetings I've been in.
Jill?
Thank you.
Yeah, I think it is difficult, and I think it's actually been really encouraging, actually, because we haven't met each other before, and we just met each other in the green room, in the back there. And, we had a couple of very small conversations before we came through here, but what's been nice, without wanting to repeat what everybody else has said, it's really rewarding to think, yeah, that's how we think about it. That's kind of what we're deliberating on. And it's just that kind of camaraderie that we're all kind of dealing with the same challenges. We all kind of want a similar outcome, because I couldn't agree with you more around, embedding DE&I across all of the life cycle, across your human capital strategy is really important, because I really think it helps emphasize the business case for DE&I. I think it also ensures that there's a kind of multi-pronged approach to what you're trying to do, and you're having to demonstrate the value alongside all other initiatives that are associated with human capital. And I think not that it normalizes DE&I, but it helps, I think, build connection for those people that aren't as close to it from a day-by-day standpoint. The other thing that I would say that is really important is really to think through intentional planning. So, we have our ERGs, and ERGs are not responsible for DE&I strategy at our company. We don't give that huge responsibility to them. They're part of our DE&I strategy, but they don't own it. But I think, we get with them, there's 4 different groups, and we make sure that there's a lot of intentionality behind what they're trying to do, that they are doing things that are supportive of the business objectives, and that they are reaching broad audiences in the organization. So that's kind of, you've got your employee base, and then they do have executive sponsors, and those people can kind of help bridge the gap, the feedback gap. And then obviously the executive team work on, what are the things that we need to prioritize. And I think that kind of top-down, middle kind of approach just helps with the integration of what we're trying to do.
Madhuri, an important part of DEI has been a sense of workers feeling heard and seen. At your company has a program called Pipeline to the CEO, correct?
Yeah.
It's quite fitting for an energy company. It enables everyone to send their ideas directly to the top and get an answer.
Yep.
Has this had an impact, and what other programs can create this kind of transparency and even democracy?
Yeah, thanks for highlighting that. So we do have this amazing initiative from our CEO, and I probably shouldn't call it an initiative. I think it's there to stay. Initiative always means something starts and stops, right? So our CEO likes to hear from the front lines. So he's created what's called a pipeline to CEO, which is an anonymous way for anyone to write directly to him. He reads all the emails that come into that pipeline, into that inbox, and responds personally to them, each one of them, and each of the responses is then published on our intranet for everyone to see. Wow. So that, I believe, is a really powerful way through which he shows his ability to be humble, wanting to listen directly with no filters, and then takes up and responds to each one of them, which sends a really strong message to the enterprise that there is a way to be heard. And we've seen all sorts of stuff come through, and he does the job. He'll consult with whichever department he needs to consult with, and then he responds. So something like this is one step in the direction of creating the space for belonging for everyone, right? When you can't reach their leaders, that's the fastest way to then disrupt a culture that you're trying to create by creating barriers. So that's one initiative that comes to mind. I think other programs that allow this kind of transparency and equity and create those platforms are great ways to sort of build that culture of belonging. Nothing else is coming to mind right now, but one of the things that we are working on is really to make sure that all of our skill building that we do for our people leaders doesn't stop there, right? That we truly believe that if we do stop with just the people leaders, we'll still not get the culture we want, because this has to be embedded across the organization. Because at the end of the day, we're all working with each other, whether you're a people leader or not. And so everybody needs the tools. And we can create islands where leaders are not really empowered if nobody else has the same skill set and the language of belonging. So our goal is to get there. That'll be a long journey, 7,000 people in 40 countries. It'll take us a while to get there, but we will. So I don't know if I answered your question.
You did. Lucho, can I hear from you? Can I hear from you on this one?
Yeah, you remind me, we kind of have a similar journey where, remember when I was telling you guys about the surveys, right? We asked for feedback. And apparently in the past, and this is how powerful is a survey, we were asking for feedback, what do you think about these surveys? And we asked people to give us feedback, etc. And apparently in the past, we had a tendency of asking people's opinion, but we didn't do anything about it. And that was an interesting feedback where, as part of this learning or DEI maturity, we definitely, the commitment that upper management did on this initiative was to listen to people and at least being able to address at least two of the, 8 or 10 things that they asked. And that was an interesting thing, because that's how you increase or improve your belonging, or at least you are trying to address. Are we going to be able to address all of them? Probably no, but at least you are doing something. Versus in the past, at least I'm going to use the word perception, because you never say never or what happened in the past, but it was really interesting. And at the beginning, some of these people were, why do you ask for my feedback or my opinion if you're not going to do anything? And again, that's part of learning and become better as a company and as a culture. That was an interesting feedback.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So we know data is important, but quotas are somewhat of a bad word now. So in the context of the current climate, what measurable outcomes and metrics should organizations prioritize to demonstrate the success and effectiveness of their Reframe DEI initiatives? Mindy?
Quotas is not a good word. Targets is not a good word. These are some of the words we don't use. We use words like goals, ambitions, aspirations. Those are some of the words that we use because it's giving you a sense of the direction of travel without without mandating anything. So some of the things that are important, data is important. HR's credibility is built on data.
Yes.
Right.
Full stop. If you can't produce the data, you know your client groups are not happy with you. I think
Right,
we've all
right.
been there.
Yes.
And so we need good data. And in the D&I space, we need good data, and we need to be cautious about the terminology of that data. Right now, some of the data that we're finding very fascinating in the DEI space is employee turnover data. And specifically length of tenure in companies, employee engagement data, hotspots and responses, and digging into that. These are some of the pieces of data that we're looking at now, or that we're finding to be more fascinating, because it's not about everybody's journey. Again, it's about delving into certain underrepresented groups of people, their journey to figure out where is the connection and where is the belonging. So of course we have diversity metrics. We share those in our ESG publications and stuff like that. But I think some of the data that we're digging into, balanced slate, balanced panel, we've been talking about that for about 2 or 3 years. That's not new, but employee experience data is becoming much more at the forefront, and turnover data, I think, is getting a little bit of a light shine, especially coming out of COVID. So I think for the last 3 or 4 years, that's some of the places that we're digging in a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Jill?
Well, I think it goes back to what I was talking about earlier in terms of integrating your D&I practices. So we do, on a quarterly basis as an executive team, look at human capital data across the whole spectrum of human capital activities, including DE&I. And I think it's helpful, again, going back to what I said earlier, that we're not having that as a separate measurement, that it really is how successful are we in terms of what we're investing in when it relates to human capital. And in order to get, because I think there is a tendency to your point there, that you have all this data but you don't really do anything about it. Like, what is it actually telling you? So what we've started to do is almost have a little bit of a traffic light system. It's quite basic, but it's kind of, you can look at it and be, okay, we're not going in the right direction in this regard. So rather than get fussed up on the numbers, you're kind of like, okay, this is an area that we're not pleased with, we're not happy about, what strategies do we need to have to kind of move it in the direction that we're looking to go. And that's working for us and keeping it top of mind, because we're doing it quarter by quarter so you can see the trends.
Madhuri, I want to ask you, when you consider the potential legal challenges for things like alleged reverse discrimination, how can advocates ensure that DEI initiatives not only comply with legal standards, but engagement?
That's the hardest question. It is, truly, because again, I think if we're not careful, this work around D&I is filled with legal minefield. It is. Because very quickly you can cross or have a practice that is not compliant or is not legally sound. So we have a really tight partnership with our general counsel, and we have them audit all our practices on a regular basis. Right now, to your point, we are trying to figure out in terms of inclusive hiring, getting to, a practice where we can have diverse slates every time we hire. But that itself has got legal constraints around it, right? And so this is, something that we're always sort of checking in with legal to make sure that we're not tweaking a process in a manner that would lead to questions about its validity legally. And then the other piece is around the perception among the employees, right? So you can do everything correct, you can do everything within the legal parameters, but then there's a perception around these practices, which are varied depending upon who you are, where you sit, how far from the headquarters you are, and how it lands on you, what you hear about it. And so that is also something that we have to consistently think about, how are we communicating this? And when it becomes a black box, if it's a practice that was cooked up in the headquarters and it stays in the headquarters and nobody has visibility to it, the more likelihood that there's going to be a false narrative around that in the organization. So transparency is super important. That's where the pipeline to CEO is very helpful. When people write in that, hey, we are becoming an organization of quotas, he gets to address that and explain that to the employees that what actually it is, and it's not about the quotas. So we find that mechanism super helpful. And then we, as a team, get to amplify his responses forward. I want to make one point about the shifts. One, from the numbers, what we are trying to lean more into, and I don't know whether this is going to be kind of how it's going to play long term, we're trying to lean more into storytelling and showcasing where things are being done well, so that it's really not about the numbers, it's about where we're getting it right. So for example, last Q3 town hall for 2023, we made a commitment in the D&I Council that every town hall will have a D&I spotlight. So we have about 6 minutes to spotlight a leader who's doing something phenomenal in their team, in their plant, no matter where in the globe. So we give them a platform to tell their story. Once we did the engagement survey, we're now creating a spotlight for managers who are getting it right, right? Where they are doing things either in taking action on the survey and the feedback they got, or they're just been doing things right and their retention is great, or they've had a turnaround story around attrition. So we're trying to lean more into that, once again, to make sure that we're not focusing on the numbers, which again, I believe are distracting.
Can you give our panelists a round of applause?
Thank you.